I am so excited to welcome Dr. Paula Bennett today for our seminar. So I'm just going to do a little intro and then I'm going to hand over to Paula. So Dr. Paula Bennett is a registered adult and children's nurse with a distinguished clinical career leading innovation in advanced practice, paediatric emergency care and clinical informatics, and holds a professional doctorate from the University of Salford focusing on computerised decision support. As Chief Nurse at Health Innovation Manchester, she provides senior clinical leadership across the innovation portfolio, acting as Senior Responsible Officer on complex system-wide projects and leading the clinical team who support the adoption and spread of innovation across Greater Manchester. Paula is passionate about innovation's role in creating healthier communities and champions the fundamental importance of the clinical voice in both the development and deployment of healthcare innovation. We are so delighted to have you here today, Paula, and I'm going to hand over to you now just to say if you have any questions or anything you'd like to put to Paula, please pop it in the chat or the FAQ and we will have a little Q&A session afterwards.
Thanks, Judith, and thank you for that introduction. I'll just share my slides. Bear with me a second. And I think it... one more minute. I'll just get those on the full screen. There we go. Is that showing full screen now? Yeah.
Looks great.
I think it's slightly unnerving knowing there are lots of people listening but not being able to see them. I can see the numbers going up. So it was great to chat to Jude about these seminars, and I put my hand up probably about 8 or 9 months ago to say, oh, I'd be happy to talk about my career journey and doctoral research, and I've probably not followed a normal route, and that might be interesting for people to listen to. So I've got some slides kind of split into 2 halves really. The first half really talking about my kind of doctoral journey and the impetus for doing research in clinical practice, which started 20 years ago. And then more latterly, really to describe how I've applied those research, that research knowledge and skills and that wider skill set that you develop as a clinician researcher, and moved into a career in kind of system-wide innovation, and to talk about the application of research skills and knowledge in that field. So I hope that's what you were expecting. A lot of these are personal reflections. It's been a bit of a memory lane for me as I've been preparing for this seminar. Naturally, I've been working in the NHS 40 years. This year I started my nurse training in November 1996. So I'm sure there are much younger earlier career researchers on the course, so I'm hoping I've been able to explain some of the context of when all this work started and kind of what the NHS and healthcare was like, but also what it was like for people who had an interest in research when career development didn't really exist. So that I'm hoping to deliver this, and I'll take you through the slides now. So I'd spent 30 years in clinical practice, and I'd had various roles working in emergency care, and was also fortunate enough to have a lecturer practitioner role where I was able to split my time between clinical practice and working in a university, leading post-registration specialist education in Greater Manchester. So I'd always been interested and very passionate about research and learning. That was always a great kind of stimulus for me in my career. And the impetus for my research started 20 years ago. In 2005, was working in clinical practice as a practice development nurse, and I was doing lots of service development, providing lots of training for clinical staff, developing guidelines, new ways of working, thinking about how we were responding to the pressures in emergency departments, increasing patient numbers, challenging workforce. But no matter what we did, we encountered problems around safety and quality, and we'd review those incidents, we'd put more processes in, pathways in, but we still encountered them. And there was a recurrent issue, or I say recurrent, it felt recurrent at the time, but an issue that cropped up more than once, where inexperienced clinicians saw patients and either weren't aware that a guideline existed, or didn't follow it, or didn't fully understand it, and it led to safety issues. And I can remember vividly a conversation with the director of nursing at the time saying, Paula, what can we do to stop these things happening? And I'd been puzzling the idea as well, and thought that a solution might be some decision support, or some way of consistently flagging the guidelines that were associated with the presentations when people arrived in the emergency department. So how could we develop some standardized decision support at the point of triage, so that regardless of the experience of the triage nurse, there were the right flags and prompts to ensure then that the assessing clinician, be that a junior doctor, a locum doctor, or somebody senior, had access to the right information and the standard and guidelines to assess the patient. So it was from there that over a 2-year period up until 2010, we developed in a department that had no electronic patient record. Everything was on paper, all the nursing records, all the x-ray requests, all the medical records. We developed the first phase of an EPR in an emergency department to help address that problem. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in the build and the design of the decision support, and launch it in the emergency department, and then undertake research to evaluate the quality and safety benefits of it. So this was a kind of continual cycle of practice influencing innovation, the opportunity to develop an innovation, which then created an opportunity to undertake research to evaluate the impact of that. So the context as a clinician researcher, and I undertook a professional doctorate where there's a particular spotlight on your role as a practitioner and the practice context of the research. That was a very important feature of working out the right approach to undertake an evaluation of the impact of the innovation, the decision support, and also important to reflect on your role, influence and bias that might be associated with you developing the innovation in the first place, in my case, and then also undertaking the research. So just to kind of put this in the context of what was happening in the NHS at the time. So this is the early 2000s, and as I said, the department I worked in had the patients were booked in electronically, and then everything else was on paper. And there were various technical developments at the time. Choose and book, if you can remember that. It was the launch of the 5-a-day campaign for kind of public health. The A&E 4-hour target came in the early 2000s, which obviously was a huge thing for emergency departments at the time. So those are the kind of wider contextual things that were happening. And also the pressure in emergency departments was increasing year on year. It was when we started to see longer waits and all the workforce challenges that you know, are still with us today, if not worse. So the clinical context, very important at the time to kind of think about the research question, and then the practice context and how you can undertake robust, rigorous research in clinical practice. And for me, an emergency department not lending itself really to any kind of randomized controlled trial. The requirement really to answer the question, does computerized decision support improve quality and safety, that lending itself to some form of quantitative analysis. But thinking, you know, pragmatically in the real world, how can you undertake that with minimum impact on the service and the staff and the patients, but make sure that your outcomes, so the things that you want to understand, you can actually measure. And the research method was longitudinal, before and after, but using interrupted time series. So how can we collect data before the introduction of the innovation? How can we let the innovation embed? And then how can we collect data after? So all of those things are very important to consider when you're thinking about research in a clinical context. And also it's really important to think about your assumptions and biases. And when I reflect back, I thought this was the solution. It would be the panacea to all the problems, that you introduce decision support and we'll get it right every time. And it's not until long after that I've reflected, and of course we're much more exposed to pop-up fatigue and being able to kind of click past reminders in systems, and also find amazing workarounds, that I realised the kind of naivety at the time. So very important to speak to lots of people about your research, to get the challenge back and to broaden your view and your thinking, and be very kind of reflective and self-aware about your own preferences and style and risk averseness or not, because those all have an impact on the research and even how you direct any innovation. So that's kind of the background. My career journey, when I started my training, that wasn't nurse training in a health, in a university or a HGI. So it was in a school of nursing on a hospital site. So lots of kind of academic development whilst working clinically. So early career, degree at Manchester. I was fascinated in understanding why people presented, because quite often it was a puzzle. That was, you know, very stimulating research for me to get into the evidence that was out there about why people present to A&E, and actually A&E attendances are a symptom of the wider services in a system, or lack of them, or lack of the ability to understand how to access them, because we don't make that clear to people. And then more mid-career, a clinical master's, because I was developing as an advanced practitioner. I developed an emergency nurse practitioner service in the department that I worked, and I was very interested in the communication element of the consultation. I'd learned a lot about how there's a lot of evidence around that in primary care, but perhaps less in my specialty. So I was interested in understanding that. And I had lots of opportunities in my mid-career that I'm hoping I can kind of encourage you, or you might go away and think about, that sounds interesting. I wonder how I might be able to access an opportunity. Had a travel scholarship just before we were building a paediatric emergency department, so I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Melbourne and Toronto to look at the paediatric emergency departments in those hospitals, and that really helped the department's thinking. I was able to bring back what I'd seen and heard and learned to shape how services were developed. So things like that, understanding internationally what's happening is kind of brilliant for your thinking, and kind of gets you out of what you know. And I'd had other opportunities to publish. Very proudly, we just have had the 3rd edition of the Oxford Handbook of Emergency Nursing published in December. So being able to kind of collaborate and write with other colleagues, particularly in the specialty that you're really passionate about, has been great. And also being an associate editor on a journal and being involved in that is great for developing your academic and research knowledge, reviewing papers, particularly if you're studying now, getting the opportunity, perhaps with supervisor support, to review papers also helps you understand the wider evidence base. And if you can tab into international journals, again, that broadens your knowledge and experiences. I suppose then moving on to doctoral research, which I began in 2008. I've said the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's certainly been the hardest thing I ever did, particularly because it was quantitative research, and that is not my strength. And but it was the right method. It was the right research method to answer the question. So I think the tenacity and perseverance that's required to stick with research over a long period of time that is new and novel gives you a lifelong skill set that you can apply across your career. Doctoral research and even professional doctoral research, that if you're doing a professional doctorate, you tend to do that with a peer group. It's lonely, and if you're a nurse doing quantitative research, it's even lonelier. In my cohort of 10, I was the only person who was doing any quantitative research, and at the time there wasn't a lot of quantitative nurse researchers that I could tap into. I had to go to other schools, School of English and Politics in the university at the time, to get some more training on statistics. And a key thing is to find your motivators, particularly when it gets hard. I've just popped up a screenshot of a book by Hugh Kearns from a website called I Think Well. And Hugh Kearns is an Australian researcher, and he was doing a university tour. He came to the university I was studying in, and I went to listen to him, and it was very motivating because I was stuck and couldn't write. Another thing that I found very helpful was some peer coaching that was offered by the NHS Northwest region research collaborative. I've probably not quite got that title right, but that was a kind of offer out to doctoral researchers to have some peer-to-peer coaching, and that was very kind of got me out of my rut. So I suppose explore and find the things that enable you to really stick with it when it's tedious and lonely and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it took 6 years for me to get to the point of Fiverr. I was working full-time whilst I was doing research. It was really challenging at times, but now, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, it was the best thing I've done in my career, and it's been a springboard to increasing confidence, increasing networks, obviously knowledge and skills, and also kind of broadening opportunities for later career development. And these are the transferable skills. These were certainly the skills for me. The skills for you may be different, but problem solving skills. This kind of third one, working the work out for yourself, because you are in charge of your doctorate and the direction of your research. And of course, you've got supervisors and you can draw on a range of experts, but you have to work independently and you have to solve all the problems that you encounter as you move along. So knowing how to seek support and the right kind of support and reaching out to people, it's very easy now with Teams and technology to contact people all over the world who are doing similar research or may have. Your bravery definitely increases because you're kind of out on a limb with your research. You are exploring territory that's, you know, not been explored before, or the evidence base is low or weak, and you are wanting to, certainly for me, having a vested interest in understanding the thing that we had developed as a department actually did do what we assumed it would do. Creates a kind of mixture of pressure and being able to recognise the biases associated with that. Talking about your research and creating a positive impact from it enables you to talk more about the work that you do, the work that you're doing, the people that you work with. I'm very highly reflective and introvert, so it wouldn't be natural for me to talk about what I was doing. I'd be thinking a lot about what I was doing, but I wouldn't necessarily talk about it. So kind of understanding that element of you as a person, and how your research can perhaps enable you to flex the extrovert in you or the introvert in you, it is a great skill for later career. And then for me, after doctorate, or maybe towards the end of it, I was wondering what to do next, that I developed lots of new knowledge and skills and wanted to be able to utilize them. And I probably spent about 3 years speaking to people, wondering about the next steps. This was before clinical academic careers. It was certainly before opportunities in less research active hospitals for non-medical researchers. And that's when I moved into Health Innovation Manchester in a role still linked with urgent and emergency care, but applying particularly the data and analytics skills that I'd learned. And then from there, working much more across innovation and just keeping an eye on the time. The work that we've done over the last couple of years at Health Innovation Manchester, one example here, supporting the kind of initial scoping and development of the Greater Manchester Virtual Awards programme, and the importance in that programme for me as a clinician, but also the clinicians that we were working with, was to understand the evidence base around existing models nationally and internationally. So this next section, I'm just going to talk in a bit more detail about innovation. And I'm going to come back in a couple of slides to that virtual award example, just to describe the innovation process and the way that we certainly are developing that in Greater Manchester. So Health Innovation Manchester is one of 15 health innovation networks. We used to be called Academic Health Science Networks, AHSN, and we were rebranded by NHS England probably about 3 years ago. We were lucky because we didn't really have to change our name because we were called Health Innovation Manchester, and you can see we cover Greater Manchester with a population of 3 million, and in the northwest we've got Health Innovation Northwest Coast, which covers the other 2 ICSs in the northwest region. So we were established to support the spread of innovation at pace and scale across the NHS. And in Greater Manchester, our vision's to be world leading in improving the lives of local people, transforming care and boosting the economy. And we do that through collaborating with health and care organisations, our universities and industry partners, making sure we've got a true understanding of the needs of the population of Greater Manchester. And I thought it was kind of really worth flagging that innovation has got a prominent role in Fit for the Future. In fact, somebody had counted how many times the word innovation, AI, digital was in this plan, and it's hundreds of times. There are the 5 big bets, which are all innovative technologies around artificial intelligence, robotics, etc. There's also sections about the structural and financial support that's needed for innovation, because you have to commission a piece of technology in a new pathway for kind of system-wide adoption, and there are lots of financial barriers to that. There's talk of the development of global institutes and regional innovation zones. We're yet to really understand what a regional innovation zone means. Greater Manchester would have a few with its devolution and mayoral support and our university academics and expertise that were well placed to become an innovation zone. And it also talks about removing the barriers and streamlining adoption, and that innovation just becomes business as usual, that there's training and we understand the capabilities needed for clinicians and operational managers to test out new innovation and work out the best ways to adopt them into practice. Definitions are always useful, and there's a lot of kind of interchangeability between improvement, innovation and transformation. If you are kind of reading around the subject, as an organisation, we choose to use these 3 definitions, and I think of it improvement as you know what to do, and you want to remove unwarranted variation and get better at doing the right thing. So that would perhaps be adherence to a nice guideline for the management of patients that present with head injury, for example. Innovation is the introduction of something new. It might be technology, it might be artificial intelligence, and it's over and above what's currently part of an accepted standard. So some degree of novelty in there. And that may very well blur into transformation, where the innovation is so significant, like the introduction of AI, for example, that it actually radically transforms the way that you deliver care. Perhaps virtual wards is a good example of innovation in terms of wearables, creating a transformative way of delivering care to people in their own homes. Okay. And this is our pipeline method at Health Innovation Manchester, and I'm just going to elaborate particularly on the understand, reimagine and implement, and think about the importance of evidence and clinician input into the design and deployment of innovation. And I suppose I'm spent most of my career problem solving, as clinicians do, but I never really thought about it as innovation. We just found something that didn't work and thought about how we might do that differently. Or you might go to a clinical audit and identify that there were areas that you could improve on, so you go away and think about how to do that differently. That's innovation in its broadest sense. It doesn't have to be a new amazing robot in a surgical theatre that's transforming the way that you do surgery, for example. So the method that we kind of frequently talk about is understand, reimagine and implement. And this is where lots of kind of research knowledge and softer skills that you learn as you're doing research really come into play. Understand is making sure that you really understand the problem and that you understand it in its broadest sense along the whole pathway or the patient journey. Because quite often you might be presented with a problem from a clinical group or an organisation or a particular specialty because they've got a problem in a particular area, but actually standing back and understanding that whole experience for every clinician that might interact with a patient, and also what that experience is like for the patient, helps get everybody really on the same page, but helps you fully refine the problem that you're trying to address. And in that, critically, is understanding the evidence base. So that might be the evidence for the innovation and how that's been tested and trialled and studied. It may be the evidence base around the NICE guideline, which supports the implementation of something because you have to redesign a pathway because there's new guidance. Understanding your own population data, whether that's at a locality or Greater Manchester level, for example, is really important. Understanding what's currently happening and what service models are out there, because there are pockets of excellence everywhere. The challenge that the NHS has is standardising that so that all patients can experience that high quality care. Increasingly important is to understand the costs of care and also the human costs, so the things that aren't quantifiable in cash, and also the impact on economic inactivity. That's important for the prosperity of the Greater Manchester, but also the country, and enables people to stay healthier and be in work and live a better, healthier life. So lots to do in an initial understand phase. This isn't about, or it can be about, or can be presented as, oh, we need an app here, or we need some AI to do this, or we need a particular product. It's about really getting back to basics and understanding the full problem to then present that back to all the stakeholders and work on how you might reimagine the service, the pathway, the experience with all of those that are impacted to design something new. And again, that's deep in citizen and staff experience to work together to co-design, to think about the data and digital elements that we should consider, and also what the costs of any new models would be. And then finally, the implement, which is the challenge. You may have to do some smaller proofs of value in a smaller area before you're able to deploy at scale. That helps you understand in the real world how something is working, the benefits, the disbenefits, the return on investment, the unanticipated benefits or disadvantages, so that you can do some more refining before you can develop full business cases and get new innovations commissioned. last couple of slides. So from a clinical innovation perspective, making sure you've got the right insight all the way through an innovation cycle. Make sure that the innovation's rooted in real world clinical need and evidence. That good clinical engagement gets the right clinicians round the table to collaborate and shape the design of the innovation and the best way to introduce it. And also, critically, there's a governance element around quality and safety and how you maintain that through the innovation cycle and the transfer over into business as usual. So these are some of the fundamental elements in innovation that people like myself are involved with every day. And then I think this is my last slide. We've done some work internally. We've got a small team of clinicians across primary and secondary care, across medicine and nursing, to think about the components for clinical innovation, what's required of us, and what are the important elements within innovation that we have to consider around data, information governance, risk management, implementation expertise, data expertise, etc. So we have got all these components to consider when we're at the very beginning of an innovation project. So I can't believe I've finished exactly on time. I hope I didn't rush that second part too much. I think that was just for me due to say thank you for everybody. And I think there might be time for a couple of questions. Shall I stop sharing?
That's great. I mean, you can leave it up for now, but
okay.
Equally, no, I don't know. I don't have an answer. Either is fine. Thank you so much, Paula. That was such an interesting talk. I suppose just to put it out to people that have joined us, and thank you for joining us. If you have any questions for Paula, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. So I have a couple of questions of my own while we wait.
Goodness.
So one of mine is, there might be difficult ones too. So my first one is, putting it to you, it was really interesting what you were saying about how when you were doing all of this stuff, it wasn't recognized as being a thing, a clinical academic career. And I would say to an extent, it's still just very difficult and people don't really know how to get there. So what advice would you give a nurse, for example, who is interested in research but doesn't know where to start?
I think there are a couple of things. I think creating a network, finding a mentor, sending emails, knocking on people's doors, trying to speak to people who have done what you think you might be interested in. And then I think is just getting involved in something. If you can, even if it's just observing what people are doing, shadowing people, joining meetings, understanding that whole kind of landscape of research in your own organisation. People love to talk about the research. So finding people who are active and, networking with them and building relationships, I think that would be the starting point.
Thank you. We have had one query that has come in, so thank you. This is Paula. Thank you for this inspiring talk. It was amazing. Could you please give us an insight into why you chose a role in NHS innovation and what other avenues you considered?
Yeah, I think it was probably by accident more than design. I spent time. I was quite, I don't know if I do it now, but I was quite brave. I think at the time I emailed directors of nursing in other organisations and said, this is me, and could I come and chat to you about whether there are any opportunities in your organisation for me? And at the time, the feedback I got was, well, you need to make a decision to either go into a university or go into management. So that was quite disappointing feedback. And I didn't really want to do either of those because I loved clinical practice. So that's why it took about 3 years for me to find the role that I applied for at Health Innovation Manchester, which was the sweet spot for me because it was urgent emergency care. So the specialty I love, it was using data and it was to help improve services. I think it was luck.
I mean, that's interesting, but in a way, unfortunately, not surprising to me that there's that sort of view on it. What would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions of a research career or clinicians who do research?
I think I hear people say, I'm not academic, so I couldn't do this. And I'm not academic. I left school with 4 O levels. I did do A levels, but didn't go to university. I'm from a working class family. So I don't actually know really what people mean when they say I'm not academic. They've got some assumption that it's somebody over here who isn't like them. And I think if you are passionate about your specialty, you're curious, then research is for you.
Yeah, do you know, I completely agree on that one, actually. I think being a really good researcher is actually a lot like being an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And it's the brave, the bold, and the people that can take the knockbacks. What you were saying about the cold calling. Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. I think we've got one more question and then we might have to close because we're on time. But okay, I'm just going to read out the whole thing. So thank you, excellent talk. Everyone I speak to has said that doing a PhD is hard work. Surprise. What tips can you give for someone who wants to do a PhD part-time alongside clinical work and family life?
Yeah, I think I suppose be prepared for the impact it has and the sacrifices that you have to make and the things that you're not able to do because you have to write. And I suppose make sure that your family are on board with that and are able to support you. And that your organisation supports you as well. And that might not be where you're working now for some of you. But the benefits far outweigh the sacrifice, even though it's over a long period of time. So I suppose it's think about the long game and the end goal, and I suppose don't give up.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Paula. I did have more questions, but I think we need to close there because we've gone past time. Thank you so much, Paula. That was just so interesting. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yeah,
just to let you know, if Paula is happy, what we'll then do is we will save this and we'll upload it to YouTube, and then we will circulate the link to everyone on the list so that you will, I guess, be able to refer to it again if you want to.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.